Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take us back 40 years. Some of you may remember those times around GLAAD's founding in 1978. Some of you not so much. Our current executive director, Jansen Wu, was just 75 days old when GLAAD's Articles of Organization were accepted by the Massachusetts Secretary of State on July 20th, 1978. We did business as GLAAD, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, but our corporate name was Park Square Advocates, Inc., a nod to the location of our original office at 2 Park Square in Boston, because it was not possible for many to write a check to an organization with gay and lesbian in its name. 1978 was not terribly great for LGBTQ people in America, although it was a bit better than it had been in the 1950s and 1960s. Still, sexual intimacy between people of the same sex remained commonly criminal. There were virtually no protections against discrimination. Couples were treated as legal strangers to each other, while biological parents could have their children yanked away at a moment's notice based on sexual orientation alone. And of course, non-biological parents had no protection whatsoever. GLAAD's founder, John Ward, one of that select generation of post-Stonewall pioneering out-gay lawyers who is here with us tonight, John had a vision of something totally different and set out to change that picture. He gathered a group of board members who reflected that generation's gay liberation activism and the ideals of the time. Ed Haugen, a bisexual minister who was GLAAD's first board president, and his boyfriend, Bobby Stevens, was the first treasurer. His wife, Margaret, was a volunteer. Richard Burns, then the editor of Gay Community News and also a GLAAD board president for many, many of our early years. Urvashi Vad, who many of you know, who has had too many roles in the community for me to even start down that path. Cindy Rizzo, a lawyer and activist and law partner of John Ward. Charlie Shively, who died recently, a college professor who was an advocate for a change in age of consent laws, to name just a few. We commonly said in those early years that our mission was to speak in the courts in our own voices about issues of concern to our communities and to educate judges, lawyers, and the general public. We told the Commonwealth in our public papers that our purpose was to, quote, vindicate the public interest in obtaining justice for gay people and to gain the protections and benefits of full participation in the American legal system. That is what John and his crew set out to do. And that is what we have, in fact, done for 40 years. Making history by changing law and policy. So some of the better-known highlights include these. Our challenge to the exclusion of a GLB Irish group from Boston's St. Patrick's Day Parade. John Ward argued that case before the Supreme Court in 1995. We lost that one, but the work never ended. And did you see in the paper not very long ago that a gay man, Brian Bishop, who leads the group OutVets, has just been appointed by the South Boston Allied Veterans Council as the director of parade operations? Then there was our fight with Governor Michael Dukakis when he pulled 2 foster children from their home because the foster parents were a gay male couple, Don Babbitts and David Jean. The Commonwealth fought hard, but ultimately changed its policy. Or our fight against a Maine dentist who refused to treat an HIV-positive individual, Sidney Abbott. Ben Klein, our AIDS Law Project director, argued that case at the U.S. Supreme Court. And he won a decision that all people with HIV from the first moment of infection are protected from discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And And of course, our fight for marriage equality in all 6 New England states, including victories in the highest courts of Massachusetts and Connecticut, as well as our work on the national level, which culminated with the 2015 victory at the Supreme Court, where the couples seeking the right to marry were represented by our Civil Rights Project Director, Mary Bonato. And you know, there were plenty of things that got less publicity but were equally as important, such as our fight for a transgender bank customer who was told to go home and come back looking more masculine before a loan application would be accepted. Jennifer Levi, our Transgender Rights Project Director, took that case to the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, which issued one of the first rulings in the country that discrimination based on gender identity was sex discrimination under a federal law. Or I think of our fight on behalf of a grandfather who suddenly found himself on the sex offender registry in Massachusetts because he had been entrapped into a sexual advance toward an undercover police officer years and years before the sex offender registry law existed. Or on behalf of a gay man rousted from a highway rest stop because a state trooper thought he was parked with, quote, illegal intent. GLAAD won both of those challenges. And much of our early work has echoes of our ongoing work today. We worked on a case in 1979 where a gay man was fired from his job, and we argued that sexual orientation discrimination was prohibited sex discrimination, an issue that is likely to be on the Supreme Court's docket sometime soon. GLAAD has continued to develop the legal arguments that both sexual orientation discrimination and gender identity discrimination are in fact covered forms of sex discrimination. And whenever this issue reaches the court, we'll be there strategically involved. In 1980, we represented a Rhode Island high school student, Aaron Frick, and won him the right to bring his boyfriend to the prom. The rights and protections of our youth have never been more important. We assisted in the defense of a transgender woman who was fired from her job in 1983, and the rights of our transgender community members are at the forefront of today's fight for LGBT equality. In 1989, we kept the new Massachusetts sexual orientation discrimination law off the ballot when a referendum on that law was proposed. And there is nothing more important to our community here in Massachusetts at this moment than preventing the repeal of our transgender public accommodations non-discrimination law. So, if you don't know the right answer, yes on 3. One lesson we've learned over the years, over and over, is that history does not happen by itself. As you saw, we are the history we make. Where we are today, in terms of good things, has been the effort of a very large number of people. First and foremost, I have to say, GLAAD staff attorneys and countless private attorneys who have donated their time, treasure, and talent to support our legal work. And the entire GLAAD staff. Thank you. The entire GLAAD staff, from Grace Stoll, longtime leader of Bagley, who was the first full-time non-ED staff person at GLAAD, to the current 29 staff members who make the lawyers' work possible and effective. It's been the work of 8 executive directors, 2 of whom we lost way too young, both to cancer, Kathy Travers, our first ED, and Jan Plattner, who led us to the Supreme Court that first time in 1995. And we would not be the solid and stable organization that we are without the tenure of Kevin Cathcart, who grew GLAAD from its infancy to a solid organization built to last, and to Lee Swislow, without whom we could not have managed the large changes that happened to GLAAD after we won marriage in Massachusetts. It has been the countless plaintiffs and others who have been willing to speak out to bravely share sometimes very personal details of their lives to change things not only for themselves, but for all of us. And it has been the volunteer work of each and every one of our roughly 160 board members over these 40 years, and dedicated board presidents from our first, Ed and Richard, to our most recent presidents, Rich Yurko and Diane Phillips. And if I could take a brief pause to ask all present and past board members who are willing and able to please stand so that we can recognize your contributions. And last, but certainly not least, are all of you and those who preceded you, whose financial support made possible all of our accomplishments over the years. You have made GLAAD a powerful part of our civil society infrastructure that makes democracy work. And you know, right, that we have much more work still to do and history to make. How our next 40 years unfold depend on what we are doing now. For GLAAD, that work right now includes continuing our challenges in the District of Columbia and in California to the hateful Trump administration tweet-based policymaking that excludes transgender individuals from the military. Which, to date, we have successfully thwarted. But the administration's will to enact this ban remains intense, and our injunction blocking the ban is currently on appeal and undoubtedly headed to the Supreme Court. This is a battle we must win. It includes calling out Mutual of Omaha for its ridiculous and nonsensical policy of denying long-term care insurance to men who take Truvada as a protection against HIV infection. Mutual has fought long and hard against us, but I honestly don't see how they can win this one. It means representing 2 LGBTQ youth incarcerated in the Long Creek detention facility in Maine, where they faced inhumane treatment from other youth and from staff. We worked for their release, as well as in coalition with other local activists for better institutional conditions, with an eye toward the ultimate goal of closing institutions of this type. This is particularly important. This is particularly important given the disproportionate number of LGBTQ youth, especially youth of color, in these systems. It has us now representing an elderly African-American woman in Boston whose longtime partner, who suffers from dementia, was suddenly swept away to Mississippi by her nephew, while our client was kept out of the decision-making. I'm happy to report that the couple is back together in Boston. And we need to do more to look after the interests of the elders in our community. It means continuing to hammer away at the law until it recognizes as legal parents all those in our community who are, in fact, actual parents of their children. And we continue to work on ways that make establishing parentage easier and less expensive so that everyone, regardless of income, can have the safety and security of a legal bond with their children. Our senior staff attorney, Polly Crozier, has been successful this year in making the simple, voluntary acknowledgement of parentage form, always available to unmarried different-sex couples, now available in Massachusetts and Vermont to same-sex couples as well. It also means providing the legal expertise to the legislative efforts throughout New England to pass conversion therapy bans. We're almost there. We just need to get Massachusetts and Maine over the goal line, and we are determined to see that happen by 2020. And by the way, there's going to be a renewed effort from the right to challenge the constitutionality of these bans, and we are preparing for that fight right now if it arises in New England. It has us working to find innovative ways to further the safety and rights of LGBTQ prisoners including our current Massachusetts lawsuit seeking an order that the Department of Correction house our client, a Puerto Rican transgender woman, in an appropriate women's facility and not in the men's prison. And our ongoing Massachusetts coalition work, led for GLAAD by Staff Attorney Allison Wright, to reform the practice of solitary confinement here in the Commonwealth. And though this is a tiny mention, it's a huge issue. It requires upholding LGBTQ legal rights in the face of claims of religious liberty by those who are still challenged by, and perhaps, frankly, just fearful of us. So it's 2018. Have our goals and purposes changed? Well, yes and no. We are still committed to speaking in our own voice with our allies, in the courts, in legislatures, in agencies, and in the public square on behalf of the dignity and equality of LGBTQ people. We still need to work on how LGBTQ people and our sexuality and identities are viewed morally by our fellow citizens. That stigma still has to be eradicated. At the same time, throughout our 40 years of this work, we have continually expanded our points of emphasis. As an LGBTQ legal organization, we are committed to ensuring that every one of us lives in a just world. That means understanding and ensuring that our movement is inherently linked with movements to advance racial justice and economic justice, and recognizing that what we have in common with the fight for the rights of immigrants and for reproductive freedom. It means It really means never losing sight of the spirit and ideals of true liberation with which our movement and this organization began, in which a new current generation of activists is pursuing today. There is so much work to do on so many fronts, and there are so many reasons to be hopeful as we go forward. Things can seem bleak when we look at the political and legal climate these days, but I try to remember that there are equal signs of vitality in our democracy. And one of them, I believe, is this powerful organization, now called GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, which generations of advocates, including all of you, have created and sustained for 40 years. And here's to many more years ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you.